Hi, this is Len Edgerly. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles podcast. Today is Friday, April 17th, 2021. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where it snowed today. So finally did have a little snow this winter. Didn't have any in Sanibel, of course. It was very pretty. My interview this week is with Andrew Barer, a successful young screenwriter whose Amazon Original Stories trilogy Young Blood imagines what might go wrong in the science of extending lifespans of the elderly by giving them access to blood donations from young people. It's an edgy story, very well written, and he's a creative young man, 37. I very much enjoyed talking with him, and I'm glad to bring you our conversation. I'm going to jump right in first. We've got some tech tips as well, but the news story that struck me as most important this week was Jeff Bezos' last letter to shareholders as CEO of the company. He's going to be turning over the reins of the company to Andy Jassy. His letters are always, I think, written with a personal voice. It's pretty clear to me that he writes these himself, and he's a good writer. He writes in a very direct way. And this is a very personal statement. It probably will be the one that's remembered of his letters as much as the 1997 letter, which has been repeated each year to show the continuity between the original vision of Amazon and the latest one. It also made some news because we get to see what he thought of the union vote in Bessemer, Alabama. It received a lot of coverage. President Biden weighed in on the side of the union, essentially. And in the end, the workers voted overwhelmingly not to join the union. So in some ways, it was a benefit to Amazon. Clearly, that's the outcome they were working for. But I'm going to read some portions of the letter to you just so that we can hear the words, and I'll have some things to say. But I think anybody who's followed Amazon through this podcast over the 12 years is likely to be interested in what does the founder of the company say the last time he addresses the people who have invested in the company. He writes, "Does your chair," that's Jeff, he's the chair of the company, "does your chair take comfort in the outcome of the recent union vote in Bessemer? No, he doesn't. I think we need to do a better job for our employees. While the voting results were lopsided and our direct relationship with employees is strong, it's clear to me that we need a better vision, italicized, for how we create value for employees, a vision for their success." He goes on to talk about news reports that made it look like Amazon doesn't care about its employees. He disputes that. He has thoughtful data points about the number of, in one point he says that when the employees are surveyed, 94% say that they would recommend to their friends that they work at Amazon, and pointing out the wages and the health care and the other things that are known about what it's like to work there. He says, "We don't set unreasonable performance goals. We set achievable performance goals that take into account tenure and actual employee performance data. Performance is evaluated over a long period of time, as we know that a variety of things can impact performance in any given week, day, or hour. If employees are on track to miss a performance target over a period of time, their manager talks with them and provides coaching." He ends his discussion about employees with, I think, a profound shift in the vision of the entire company. He says, "Despite what we've accomplished, it's clear to me that we need a better vision for our employees' success. We have always wanted to be Earth's most customer-centric company. We won't change that. It's what got us here. But I am committing us to an addition. We are going to be Earth's best employer and Earth's safest place to work." Now, he's moving into the executive chair position when he hands over the CEO title, and he explains what that means in terms of this new expansion of the entire vision for his company. In my upcoming role as executive chair, I'm going to focus on new initiatives. I'm an inventor. It's what I enjoy the most and what I do best. It's where I create the most value. I'm excited to work alongside the large team of passionate people we have in operations and help invent in this arena of Earth's best employer and Earth's safest place to work. On the details, we at Amazon are always flexible, but on matters of vision, we are stubborn and relentless. We have never failed when we set our minds to something, and we're not going to fail at this either. Then he gets into some detailed analysis of safety issues and how they work on things like musculoskeletal disorders, MSDs, that account for 40% of work-related injuries, how they train people to try to avoid those. There are 6,200 safety professionals at Amazon. And he says we like to lead. He points out that 2.5 years ago they set a $15 minimum wage for hourly employees because they wanted to lead on wages, not just to run with the pack. He writes, and we're not done leading. If we want to be Earth's best employer, we shouldn't settle for 94% of employees saying that they would recommend Amazon to a friend as a place to work. We have to aim for 100%, and we'll do that by continuing to lead on wages, on benefits, on upskilling opportunities, and in other ways that we will figure out over time. If any share owners are concerned that Earth's best employer and Earth's safest place to work might dilute our focus on Earth's most customer-centric company, let me set your mind at ease. Think of it this way. If we can operate two businesses as different as consumer e-commerce and AWS, Amazon Web Services, and do both at the highest level, we can certainly do the same with these two vision statements. In fact, I'm confident they will reinforce each other. Now, one thing I've noticed about Jeff Bezos for a long time, and it was particularly evident when he would give presentations of new products. I remember one in California in an airline hangar, and he struck me more like a Harvard Business School professor than a CEO, explaining why the vision for the Fire tablet was not to make money selling the tablet, but was to put things on it that were of value to customers and say, this really makes sense to do it this way. He's teaching. And in the final part of this very personal letter, he says, this is my last annual shareholder letter as the CEO of Amazon, and I have one last thing of utmost importance I feel compelled to teach. When I saw that, I said, yeah, that in terms of persona or the way he sees himself as a teacher in a lot of ways, passing on things that he learned from people like his grandfather. He says, I hope all Amazonians take it to heart. And then he quotes a long passage from Richard Dawkins. He calls it an extraordinary book titled The Blind Watchmaker. And it's a fact about biology. And it makes the point, staving off death is a thing that you have to work at, left to itself, and that is what it is when it dies. The body tends to revert to a state of equilibrium with its environment. It becomes the same temperature. It basically becomes dirt. This is what happens when we die. Well, that's kind of a grim passage. What is he putting that at the end of this important letter for? He says it's not intended as a metaphor, but nevertheless, it's a fantastic one and one very relevant to Amazon. And he says it's relevant to all companies and institutions and to each of our individual lives as well. He's not afraid to extend the idea that he wants to teach us to all levels, individual companies and institutions. What does this look like? He says that distinctiveness or originality is valuable. We all know that. And we're all taught to be yourself. And then he says, what I'm really asking you to do is to embrace and be realistic about how much energy it takes to maintain that distinctiveness. The world wants you to be typical. In 1,000 ways, it pulls at you. Don't let it happen. You have to pay a price for your distinctiveness, and it's worth it. The fairy tale version of, quote, be yourself, unquote, is that all the pain stops as soon as you allow your distinctiveness to shine. That version is misleading. Being yourself is worth it, but don't expect it to be easy or free. you'll have to put energy into it continuously. The world will always try to make Amazon more typical, to bring us into equilibrium with our environment. It will take continuous effort, but we can and must be better than that. He references the 1997 shareholder letter again, saying he's grateful to customers for their business and trust. And he says these things haven't changed. He expects Andy Jassy to do a great job as CEO. And he says, thank you, Andy. And then the final sentence, just above where it says, sincerely, Jeff P. Bezos, his signature, he says, to all of you, be kind, be original, create more than you consume, and never, never, never let the universe smooth you into your surroundings. It remains day one. That's his famous saying, that it's day one in terms of all that can and needs to be accomplished. So I find that a classy, heartfelt farewell. I completely share the feelings of he lists a letter he received from a couple of shareholders talking about that they had bought 2 shares of Amazon in 1997, and they were so grateful for everything that had happened since that benefited their family. I share that gratitude. And I look forward to what Jeff, as executive chair, is going to invent on behalf of employees as he leads Amazon to become, in addition to Earth's most customer-centric company, Earth's best employer and Earth's safest place to work. I wish that phrase was easier to say. Earth's best employer and Earth's safest place to work. No matter. I mean, the meaning of the words is clear, and if they don't exactly roll off the tongue, I don't think that's going to diminish a bit how much effort this relentless visionary Jeff Bezos is going to put into it. And I think that when I look back on the New York Times article, which I thought was pretty unfair, the David Streitfeld piece, when was that? 5, maybe 10 years ago, and how Jeff put a link to that article on the homepage of Amazon and said, this article doesn't describe the company I know, but I want all of you to read it, meaning all Amazon employees, because if you know of things like this, people crying at their desks and all the other kind of exaggerated anecdotes that were in that story, tell me, And I suspect that a lot of the things that make Amazon different now, like the $15 minimum wage, like the training to help people find jobs outside of Amazon if they don't want to work there, all these things. I bet a lot of that started with that, his shock at the depiction of Amazon in that article. A similar shock, perhaps, in the coverage of this union election, to see that there was enough national coverage of it that made it look like, the union might win. They might actually organize a warehouse in Alabama, of all places. That apparently had a big impact on Jeff Bezos, to the point where he has now changed the vision of his company to expand not just customers, but to employees, and not just saying for it to be the best place to work, but to be the safest place to work. So I think this is remarkable, and I look forward to spending another 10 years or so talking about Amazon so that we can look back and say, remember that union election, and remember Jeff's last letter to shareholders. He wasn't just playing with pretty words there. It was a pivot point for a company that was already on quite an amazing arc. I've got a few tech tips for you. First, I want to note that I had mentioned a while back that the Amazon Halo appeared to be out of stock. That's that fitness band that I've been wearing. It has good sleep information and other information. Well, it's now back in stock. So to the extent I was concerned that maybe it was about to be discontinued or it wasn't being a success, at least it's back in stock. And I hope it's a success. I mean, it's tough to compete against the Apple Watch and Fitbit in this market, and it could be the next Fire phone that just doesn't work. But I enjoy mine, and I hope it continues. The other thing that is fun to talk about, and I've tried it, is there was news that the Kindle devices. This would be the basic Kindle, the Paperwhite, the Oasis, and the Voyage. Those of you that have a Voyage, which was a special Kindle model, you can now, if you don't have special offers on your device, these are the advertisements that show up on the sleep screen, you will now see on the sleep screen the cover of the most recent book that you're reading. And I thought, boy, that sounds really cool. So I called up Amazon and asked them to remove special offers on my Oasis. Now, I had heard a while back somebody said, oh, all you have to do is call up Amazon and say remove special offers and they won't charge you the $20. And I didn't want to, throw my weight around and say, I got a podcast and you better. I just was saying, look, I'd like to remove the special offers so I can see this feature of the last book that I'm reading on the sleep screen. Any chance you can do it without charging me the $20? And he said, well, let me check. And then he came back and said, no, there's no option to do that. I said, that's fine. So they charged me $20. And then he explained that what I had to do then was to restart my Oasis, which I did by going to the settings menu and then device options and then restart. It took a couple of minutes. I get to watch the boy under the tree and the progress bar go across. And as soon as it was back operating, I went to settings, device options, and there was a new choice called show cover. And I turned that on. And sure enough, the last book I was reading, which was Young Blood, the series we're going to talk about in the interview, when I clicked the power button at the top of the Oasis to turn it off, put it into sleep mode, the cover of Young Blood showed up. Now, it didn't show up brightly. It was sort of a muted version of it. And when I closed the cover on my Oasis, I realized I'm not really sure what benefit this has if you use a cover with your Kindle, because when you close the cover, it's going to sleep mode automatically, but you can't see what's on sleep mode. When you open up the device, I think that's when you would see the special offer, and when you open up the device, you sort of briefly see the cover, but then it goes to the home screen, and you're looking at sort of the same thing. So it's a little bit of a tree falling in the woods if nobody's there to see it. If I have the cover of my latest book on the screen, but I have my nice Finty cover covering it, what has it done for me? And should I really have spent that $20 to take away the special offers? I don't know. Tom Semple wrote me and was pointing this out too, and saying, "Gee whiz, are they really charging $20 to remove the special offers so people can get that? How's that going to play?" I don't know. There may be some pushback on it, but I do like the idea of a Kindle having as its cover the latest book you're reading. Somehow that brings the experience of reading the book a little closer. And if you don't use covers, I can recommend it. I think you'll really enjoy this feature. If you use covers like I do, it's I don't know. I don't know whether it's worth $20 to get this if you're using special office or not. But some good engineering went into this, and I applaud it. I think it's good. They are rolling out this feature and say it will be available in the coming weeks to customers globally on Kindle devices without ads. Now, it doesn't apply to Fire devices and the other kinds of Kindles, just the e-Kindles. Second thing I want to mention in Tech Tips, it's called Kindle Vella, and this is a new tool for authors. It's on the iOS Kindle platform. I believe that's the only place you can do this. And it gives an author the chance to publish serially. You can put up the first item in a series, and then readers can get it for free. And then if you have new, a second book, third book, they pay with tokens that they get somehow. And so you have a money-making opportunity to publish in a serial way. This reminded me of Wattpad, which is a really big Canadian platform where people can publish. And I was using it for a while. I haven't used it much lately, but there's something similar to this. I think that there's more opportunity for authors to make money using Kindle Vella than Wattpad, but I wouldn't want to assert that because I haven't used Wattpad recently. I also thought, well, can I see something that people have published on Vella. Apparently not yet. The content isn't available yet. There's no place that I could find the tokens. I called Amazon and I got a tech guy saying, I was saying, how can I find Kindle Vella titles? And he was pretty confused. And so then when I read the fine print, it said it's not available yet. So this will be rolling out probably sometime later this year. It's intriguing, and I suspect that it's going to be a real opportunity for authors, some authors who are doing these kinds of serial publication already can maybe shift to it, or maybe they have to be pretty short. I think that the longest an episode in one of these serials is like 5,000 words, so that would be not just like Andrew Barr's work where he's got 3 books and they add up to a novel, 300 pages. They're short. They're like, I don't know, comic books. Amazon is creating something new again. I always enjoy seeing that. Time now for the interview. I received an overture from Lydia Voles, a publicist for Amazon Original Stories, on April Fool's Day. She said she had exciting news, and I could tell it wasn't a joke. Her pitch was for a darkly comic trilogy of short stories written by Andrew Barr, who she said was co-writer of a Marvel Studios blockbuster Ant-Man and the Wasp. I hadn't seen that movie when it came out in 2018, but when I Googled it, I saw the 2 of my favorite actors, Michael Douglas and Michelle Pfeiffer, were in it, so I could tell that was important. The trilogy began with the already released Young Blood. That's the first of the 3, and it continues with installments 2 and 3, Blue Dog and Crescent Moon. They will be released together on April 29th. Like all Amazon Original Stories, the trilogy will be available free to Amazon Prime members as well as Kindle Unlimited subscribers. You can, when they're all up, you'll be able to download each individually, or as the complete trilogy. And there's also free digital audio. My preparation for this conversation with Andrew included watching Ant-Man and the Wasp, and that renewed my appreciation for Douglas and Pfeiffer, and also impressed me with Andrew's and his screenplay partner's writing chops. I also found an article at the website of his high school, Germantown Academy in Pennsylvania, which reminded me of how my old school loves to rave about successful alums. I connected with him on Tuesday, April 13th, reaching him by Zoom in Rockaway Beach, Queens in New York. Here is our conversation.
Was there a moment where it just flashed on you that premise of young people donating their blood so people my age could live longer would make a good story? What's the genesis of this?
Well, I feel it's probably a pretty common experience. I feel like if you're a writer, people in your life send you articles all the time that are like, this has to be a movie, this has to be a story. So my wife sends me stuff all the time, and she sent me an article just about the science. At the time, it's funny, it's just this week, actually, it's the cover of Newsweek.
Really?
Yeah, Young Blood Science. But at the time, it was kind of, there was like an article that was just kind of like, have you heard about this weird thing? And it was mostly about Tony Wiscori, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, at Stanford, and his research into parabiosis when he's sewing these mice together and combining the circulatory systems of old mice and young mice. And reading it, I just, as is often the case when I'm reading something about some scientific discovery, my mind, for whatever reason, goes to, how is this going to go wrong? Because I just feel like, it's, maybe I'm just a pessimist or something, but whenever oftentimes when human beings discover something miraculous, it's only a matter of time until we use it to either destroy something or destroy ourselves. And it just seems to me that this type of science that thinks of age as a malady, I do think that there are great things that could come of this. I mean, if we wind up curing Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, I'm all for it.
Right.
But it's a slippery slope when you start to think of age as a malady that can be cured. And so my mind just immediately went to, what are the what are the pitfalls here?
Yeah.
And so I just started to noodle with the idea, and I wrote a 10-page short story in the voice of Billy Canner, who's one of the characters in Youngblood. It was really just kind of a 10-page survey of his experience. So if you read the first book in the trilogy, what takes about 90 some pages to tell, beginning, middle, and end, he kind of gives you a survey in 10 pages in that first iteration. And I sent it to, my trusted associates, like Gabe Ferrari, my writing partner, and Will Robotham, my manager, and he shared it with Rich Abate, another manager at 3 Arts. And they all they liked it, and they just said, this is something, you should do something with this.
Well, now right there's an interesting juncture, because you've been working with these guys on films and stuff. What was the thought process of saying, well, now it's not a TV show, it's not a movie, it's a book, it's fiction that somebody like Amazon might publish? What did they see in it that led them to take that route? Well,
I think the original concept was, this is a 10-page short story, let's publish it somewhere.
I see.
And Rich knew that Amazon Original Stories was publishing short fiction. So he thought maybe they'd publish the 10-page version, Yeah. And Julia read it, and she...
This is Julia Sommerfeld, who's now head of Amazon Original Stories.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the feedback was, this is great. Can we do more?
Just so make it a longer story, like a novella?
Yeah, exactly.
Huh. And what was your reaction to that suggestion?
It was exciting. I've always wanted to work in prose fiction, and it's been some, kind of on my to-do list, but it's, with, the constant demands of screenwriting sort of kept pushing it back. So it was actually, I think, maybe a blessing in disguise to stumble into it.
Yeah, you got kind of pulled back towards something you'd been dreaming of doing. Well, as you say, even before you knew how to spell, you were dictating stories to your mother in this. But right. For that tug, it just seems like there's so much action on your film life. You might never have gotten a chance to do something serious in prose.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. I think, had it not been for the happy accident, I think it, who knows when I would have gotten around to it.
So it got published as a novella. How quickly after that did the idea emerge of turning it into a trilogy of 3 short stories?
Not too long. I think, luckily, people seemed to like it. It got decent reviews on Amazon and Goodreads and the like, and so it didn't take very long for Julia to circle back and ask if I had any more ideas. I had Eli Sweetley, the main character of the second book, Blue Dog, was already sort of I was already sort of starting to surface for me. So I did have a few ideas, but it took some brainstorming to, flesh it all out.
And how many pages was the novella when it was published?
The first book?
Yeah.
I think the published version is 94 pages.
Okay. Yeah. And then the total of the trilogy is quite a bit more than that, so it's almost approaching the size of a novel by the time you've had the 3 short stories together.
Yeah, I think it's in the neighborhood of 300.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so tell a little bit more just so that my listeners get the story. I'm sure you've got a condensed version of what's the story about. What is a listener or reader going to do when they dig into this?
Well, all right. So it's from multiple perspectives, starting with book 1. And it's about the society's method for coping with the advent of this new science. So, of course, a corporation steps into the breach and they say, we've got an idea. We're going to create these youth farms where we can, coax young people into this life of leisure in exchange for their blood. And this is in a vaguely futuristic world that's not too far into the future, because, the sort of, the culture and the desires of the youth are sort of recognizable, I think.
Right.
But it's in a world where the effects of climate change are a little exaggerated, maybe 5 to 10 years into the future. So there's a lot of reason for these young people to take the deal.
Because the quote real world is falling apart and they're being offered Shangri-La. All they have to do is give some blood.
Exactly. Yeah. And so they say, we'll pay off your student loans. We'll give you free healthcare. We'll let you live in the lap of luxury. All you have to do is give us some blood. So it's the story of the first group of kids that sign up for this, and they move on to these youth farms, and they slowly peel back the layers of what they've signed up for, and it's not all they initially imagined. And then the third perspective is the perspective of a scientist who is working behind the scenes to kind of study how these kids respond to this environment.
And talk about the love story part of it.
Frankie Halifax was a character who emerged out of a necessity, I think, to create a more discerning point of view. Billy's a cynic, kind of a devil-may-care type of guy who just, in the book, they classify him as an escapist. The scientists sort of classify the different kids in different groups, and his Billy's the kind of guy who just wants to get away from the real world and live an easy life, and so he's sort of the perfect target. But the story, I think, needed a more critical point of view, and so Frankie Halifax, who's an unemployed attorney, is the catalyst for the kids starting to wonder whether they've signed up for something they didn't fully understand. And so them meeting and falling in love is kind of, the collision of these 2 points of view, right. and how the dialogue between them is kind of the dialogue between the two types of people who might encounter this sort of environment.
It strikes me somewhere I read that in middle school at Germantown Academy, you were a bit of a rebel. So were you sort of Billy in middle school, and you could draw back on those days in terms of your worldview? Maybe
a little bit. I think that if there is a character in the book that's me, it's Billy. But Billy is definitely an intensely exaggerated version of some of my qualities. I'd like to. Because Billy sort of falls in line, and he's the type of guy who his cynicism and his so-called rebelliousness actually makes him quite controllable. When the powers that be sort of put him in a place where he feels like his vision has been realized. So I'd like to think that maybe I was examining some of the naivety of rebellion in that regard.
Right.
Looking back on some of that in my own experience probably did play into it.
That's interesting. Well, since we've touched a little bit on that, it's a very old school. Founded in 1759 in Pennsylvania, Germantown Academy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I went to a private school here in Massachusetts. Belmont Hill School is a day school for boys, and some of it sounded a little bit familiar. But I was intrigued when you talked about a biology teacher and a couple of English teachers as far back in the 6th grade as helping you have inklings of kind of the life that you wanted. And I took it that it was mainly at that time you wanted to be a writer, a Hemingway or a Stephen King or someone like that. But what do you hold in your memory that far back in terms of what a couple of really important teachers helped you to see that has turned out to be fairly prophetic?
Well, the nice thing about Germantown Academy, it was a prep school that I was lucky enough to be able to attend, and they, a lot of the teachers, especially in the English department, were PhDs who could have easily been teaching at colleges, and
right.
Dr. Peter Giuliani and Robin Graffam were two that really stand out for me in the sense, these were teachers who, when I was, 14, 15, 16, they were giving us books like Jude the Obscure and The Odyssey, and Hamlet, and the program was really based in analysis. We would read a book with the intention of sort of deconstructing it from all the different critical points of view, and we studied different critical points of view, the Marxists and the feminists and the whatnot, and it just, I think, taught us at a pretty young age to look at like the second and third layers of fiction and pull it apart and sort of get at the writer's intention. So it was just great. It was great training.
Well, and the other thing you've said is that they taught you how to express your ideas. And at one point, I think you're on a panel with somebody, and there's someone else from Germantown, and that turns out to be the most articulate person on the panel in terms of expressing ideas. But what were they teaching 14 and 15-year-olds to actually help them become better at expressing their ideas?
It's funny that I think that anecdote I wasn't on the panel. I was in the audience at a WGA screening, and Bradley Cooper was on the panel. He went to my high school. Yeah. I never met him, but he was a few years ahead of me. But it's funny because you had this huge panel of very talented people, and he starts talking, and it's like, like
I remember.
Yeah, he had the same features I did. But I'm sorry, I think I lost the thread of the question. It's just what.
Well, was there like a nugget of in order to express yourself clearly, you have to know what you're saying, or what was sort of the teaching there that actually seemed to work?
In essay writing, I think that was key, and I don't know much about how most English curriculums are structured, but for us, the essay was sort of primary, and the process of expressing yourself, introducing a point and systematically proving it was probably the most important thing in that program. And they really drilled it into us, and so I think we got a lot of practice.
Yeah. Well, now the trilogy, let's go back to that. And it's interesting because the first book is out, which the title is Young Blood. That was released on February 18th. And then the second and third both release on April 29th. I can imagine there's some experimentation that Julie and others are doing, but Amazon doesn't ever do anything sort of by happenstance. What's your understanding of the strategy of dropping the first one and then waiting almost a month and a half or so for the second and third, not having the second be this date and the third be in a month? What's going on just in terms of how they're releasing this to the Prime members and the people who are members of Kindle Unlimited?
I'm not entirely sure on the strategy. I defer to them a little bit on that because, I know originally they had said roughly, their goal was to release books 2 and 3 together roughly a year after the first book. And I think releasing them together might just be about, these are short works of fiction. And if there's, a hunger among readers to continue with the story, why keep them waiting? I'm not entirely sure if that was the goal there, but it makes sense to me. And then
okay, and the other thing I think I misunderstood. So the first one, this is the novella that was released on February 18th of last year.
Young Blood was released February 2020.
Okay, all right. So that explains it, because I was trying to go back and find the novella, and I couldn't see anything that was different than the first book of the trilogy. Right. So this is actually the book that you published, and 2 and 3 are new books, but there hasn't been a change to the first book since you published it a year ago.
That's right. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Okay. I just didn't understand that. That's interesting. Well, anything special happening on April 29th when 2 and 3 show up, or whatever happens, they'll have to be virtual, I suppose. But that's sort of release. That's pub date for your next 2 pieces.
Yeah, nothing planned. I think I'm actually coming back from a camping trip that day.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it'll be fun to see how people receive it, because I'm definitely not above reading the reviews, right? So,
sure.
I'm curious to see if how people respond, because the second book is definitely a departure.
Yeah.
So, I'm just excited to see the reaction.
I finished the first one, and they sent me an advance copy of the others. The second one starts out with a pretty heavy dose of philosophy, it seemed like, and I noticed that at NYU you kind of created a major of philosophy and literature movements. Is that something that's kind of sustained in the second and maybe the third, that you're having a chance to write about philosophy or in a philosophical vein in a way that maybe it's harder to do in a screenplay, that you're sort of exercising those muscles in this prose platform?
Right. I mean, there's definitely more room, I think, to explore those sorts of ideas in prose. Because when you're dealing with a screenplay, oftentimes you have to make sure that you're thinking about the attention of the audience and making sure you're not rambling or going off on tangents. Screen time is important and that sort of thing. And in prose, I think that there's a little bit more leeway to explore cul-de-sacs and kind of give voice to the ideas behind the story. I did have to rein myself in at times because, the length of these novellas didn't allow me to go too crazy. But yeah, it was nice to be able to explore, some of the thornier questions that these characters are asking. The ethical underpinnings of the choices that they make. The spiritual and religious beliefs that lead to certain decisions, and also the slippery slope of fanaticism, and where a seemingly good idea can take us if we don't maintain a certain level of self-awareness. So yeah, I mean, it's always been, I think, going back to my college studies, I definitely was always interested in using fiction as a tool to explore philosophical questions. And so, yeah, I did get to flex that muscle a bit here.
Well, and are you about 37 now? 37, 38?
37.
What's your philosophy of life now? You've lived a lot in 37 years, and you know the language of philosophy. Right. Have you got a way to distill the script for life that you think you're living?
No. I heard my dad once say, when someone asked his religious views, he said constantly evolving. And I took that to heart. I think, one of the points that I make in the trilogy is anyone who pretends to have the answers is a potential enemy. So I like to maintain a healthy dose of skepticism. I think that, if I had to, narrow it down to a word, I'd say agnostic, Yeah.
And evolving.
Yeah, exactly.
You've had a chance now to work pretty intensively in Hollywood and film, and now having shifted to working with Julia, and I think there was a senior editor you also worked with at Amazon Original Stories, Kirster Egerdahl. Mm-hmm. Is there any similarity or differences that's worth talking about? You're a scriptwriter, you're working with a director, you've got this creative thing that you've written, and you get input from, lots of people making a movie. Now you're a writer, and you're getting input from the editors and the publisher, Julia. Was it a different kind of coaching and improving that you received in the publishing space as opposed to how your screenwriting has been impacted or improved by the people that you work with in that setting?
Well, I guess there's some similarities and there's some differences. And the similarities are everyone on, whether you're writing a movie or writing a novel, everyone involved is, working toward the best possible product.
Right.
But the product is so different depending on which medium you're working in, because, when you're writing a screenplay, really what your goal is to provide the director the best possible blueprint for what they're going to go off and do. Mm-hmm. And, anyone who's worked from beginning to end on a movie will tell you that from screenplay to actual filming to editing, a story can change so drastically. And so, once you hand off a screenplay, you don't necessarily know what you're going to see in the end. It's just, you try to give them the best possible tool that they can take forward without you to some degree. In the writing of a novel, what was, I think, surprising to me and refreshing was just how Julia and Kirsty, and also Jason Kirk, who was initially an Amazon editor and then came back for books 2 and 3 as a freelancer, are just completely focused on making sure your vision is realized. In a weird way, I mean, for lack of a better term, I think to be put in a position of authority as a writer when you're writing a novel is almost like, when you're used to screenwriting, it's surprising. It's like, oh, right, like this, I'm the last word on this.
You're the director and the producer as well as the screenwriter in that setting. Yeah.
So it was really refreshing. And also, I mean, just that group in particular just seemed to me, I mean, I have limited experience with this stuff, but it seems to me like they are just so devoted to making sure that you're getting your point across. I mean, like at times with Jason Kirk, I mean, at times it feels like you're less of working with a director and more like working with a co-writer, really
interesting,
someone who is just completely keyed into your vision and just making sure it comes across as best it can.
Well, I'm picturing my ego in those two situations, one liking to see my name on the screen and everything like that, but isn't it kind of hard to go back to the messiness of the film writing project when you've had the chance to have everybody helping you find your vision, and when you get done with it, the book has got your name on it, and it's just kind of this intensely personal creation as opposed to a very important role in something that is really kind of made by a committee or more. Is the book writing in any way more satisfying, and you're going to have a hard time, you're going to resent the time that you aren't writing books as you get drawn further into your role at Hollywood?
No, I mean, I love them both, and they both scratch different itches in a way. I mean, like I could see, the process of writing the Youngblood novels was very intense and very lonely. Not in a bad way. It was just like you go into this hole and you live there by yourself, and it's this sort of a very intense, isolated experience.
Yeah.
I do enjoy the collaborative process. I loved being on set with the Marvel movies. The first Ant-Man Gabe and I were on set the entire time, and that was one of the greatest experiences of my life, honestly. And then we were on set again recently for our movie Gunfight, and had a great time sort of helping out any way we could. And also just, there's something really sort of rewarding and helpful about having a constant sounding board. I mean, working with a writing partner where, you're sitting there and you're either stuck on something or you can't decide if you're obsessing over something that deserves to be obsessed over. Having someone who you can talk it through with and, filter the story through different points of view. I think that especially in the film world where a movie is almost more like an album that a band releases, it's having different points of view from the very beginning just creates a more refined product.
Yeah.
There's also something interesting that happens, just today I was watching some screen tests for a film that we have in production, and seeing the characters, finally personified by actors walking through a set that was built that, I've been living in that world in my imagination for years. And suddenly I see the actual constructed set and it's like, oh, that's what it looks like now. And,
wow.
And that's the person that I've been imagining and that's who they look like. And there's something sort of, it's just, it's rewarding in a way where you can kind of see this thing step out of your imagination into the real world. So yeah, I don't think that I'll ever lose appetite for either.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think they complement each other if you have more writing projects, they're going to bring something new to your screenwriting and vice versa? Probably.
I mean, I think that if you're learning as a writer, it probably benefits all facets of your writing. There definitely are stories that will occur to me where I'm thinking, oh, this one feels like it wants to be a movie, and this one feels like it wants to be a short story or a novel. I don't necessarily know what the litmus test is for that. I think, it might just be, how much time do I want to explore how much time do I want to spend exploring an idea versus a plot, Plot lends itself to cinema, and ideas sometimes lends itself to prose, I think, but there's no real hard and fast rule.
Yeah. You talked about collaboration with Gabe, who was a roommate with you in college, and you had an early success in 2010 when Diana Gunfight got chosen, something called the Blacklist, which is like the 10 best unpublished movies that year, and it is going to be released. What's the schedule on releasing that movie that you guys worked on a decade ago?
It actually hasn't been announced yet, but I think by the time this podcast is out, it will have been announced. It'll be released on July 16th.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Lionsgate's releasing it domestically, and it will definitely be on demand and iTunes and Amazon and whatnot. But there may also be some theatrical component depending on the state of the world.
Where we're going to be.
Mm-hmm.
When you're working on a project with Gabe like this, are you guys complementing each other in ways that are very similar to what they were just out of college 10 years ago, or do you switch roles? Or if somebody was watching you two work on a script, what would they be seeing? I mean, who's Lennon, who's McCartney, or what are the creative roles that you seem to have developed?
There really is no discernible system necessarily. I mean, early on in our career, I think that we would, there would be moments where we would, he'd take the lead on something, or I would take the lead on something, and we would maybe, there would be a Lennon and a McCartney dynamic depending on the story or depending on the type of scene we were working on. But I think over the years, we've really kind of mind melded. There are times where I'll be reading a scene and I'm not even necessarily sure what were his words and what were my words. Huh. When you work with someone, on such a deep level for more than a decade, I think you really start to develop almost kind of like a unique language, Huh. It's gotten to the point where when we're working on a project, we won't necessarily break it apart in any systematic way. We'll just sort of work our way through the screenplay, and I'll do a scene and he'll do a scene, and we'll trade, and I'll put my layer on a scene and he'll put his layer on a scene, and we'll just kind of comb through the script. And by the time it's finished, we have this thing that's been scrutinized in multiple ways from beginning to end. But every project is different. So sometimes we'll spend a lot of time mapping things out. Sometimes it's more intuitive, but there's no real hard and fast rule for how we approach things.
Yeah. Well, that's probably good because it makes it more sustainable. If it was sort of the same tricks every time, it could get boring. But on any given project, you might find yourself seeing somebody different across the writing table. And I think that we get excited about different projects in different ways. I think that certain elements of certain projects will appeal to us on different levels, and will, just bring different sorts of excitement to the same project. And, it's mm-hmm. nice. It keeps things energized. Yeah. Is there anything else that you can talk about ahead with Amazon Publishing? Any future writing projects that are in early stages there?
At the moment, nothing. The trilogy's it. And, I think, at least as far as the characters in the trilogy are concerned, the story's probably over. I've never closed the door on another novella from this world, or, certainly if I come up with an idea for another story, I'll be knocking on their door.
Yeah, and I bet they'll be opening it pretty quickly. There's a line, I think, in the first thing about it's Billy or Frankie says, makes a reference to what the cool kids are reading. Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask you, what are the cool kids reading these days?
I don't know. I don't know if I am one anymore. But what am I reading right now? So right now I'm reading A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James. Huh. It's like this sprawling narrative about Jamaica at the time of the attempted assassination on Bob Marley, and the sort of the politics of Kingston, and man, it's fascinating. I mean, it's written in all these different voices, which is actually as I was reading it, I was sort of appreciating the struggle that he must have gone through, because dealing with three voices in Youngblood was a challenge. He's dealing with dozens. And
is this nonfiction or fiction?
It's historical fiction. I'm sure he takes a lot of liberties, but it's clearly rooted in a deep knowledge of the time and place.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I always try to read something new and something. I mean, like right now, I'm listening to Anna Karenina on the audiobook for the very first time. It's been on my to-do list for forever. Recently, I read Barbarian Days by William Finnegan. It's a biography about he's a writer for the New Yorker, and he's written a bunch of novels about
of surfing and
political
stuff.
Situations around the world. I mean, I think he specialized in stuff about like the apartheid era and
he's a great writer.
Yeah, but he's this prolific surfer who never went pro. He's sort of like cut from the old cloth of these surfers who just traveled the world and surfed breaks that are now world famous, and no one, he discovered some of these breaks, and so it's kind of like the classic sort of tale of a bohemian world traveler with a surfboard. It's fantastic. I think Stephen Gaghan is writing the screenplay for the film version of that book right now. Yeah, I think Tortilla Flats I read for the first time recently. I try to dip my toe in different waters.
He did a great thing with his daughter that was on Audible, and she was like a really accomplished rock climber, and he would go with her climbing, and he was the expert surfer, and very sensitive, and they were reading it themselves. He'd read a part and then she read some. It was quite moving, and some of the things that Audible is doing just in terms of doing new kinds of things in audio. What do they call them? Audible Originals. And the guy that used to run Kindle Singles is running it now. Did you have any role in choosing narrators or narrators on the trilogy audiobook? And because that's pretty highly well done as well.
I wasn't involved in choosing them, but they were they were really generous when it came to sharing the files once they had sort of chosen their voice actors, and Amazon would share the files with me and let me weigh in. So I was able to, I never heard a reader I didn't love, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I never had any complaints. I had a little, pointer here and there, like, maybe add a little emotion to this type of idea, or maybe pull back there, but just, little notes that they did take into account. But they did a great job of that on their own.
I've been speaking with Andrew Barrer, author of the Youngblood trilogy. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Before we go, I want to alert you to a great offer. There's books that are being given away free by Amazon Publishing for World Book Day, and it's a 10-day period starting yesterday, April 15th. The way to find them is to go to amazon.com/World Book Day, and they're international titles, really a intriguing mix of books. The one that I downloaded first is a memoir from Afghanistan. It's called The Broken Circle, a memoir of escaping Afghanistan by Angela Ahmadi Miller, born in 1975 in Kabul. Now she's a U.S. citizen. She's lived in India and Pakistan, and when her son was born here in the U.S., she decided to write this book about her memories of Afghanistan. My guest next week is going to be James McQuivey, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester. We'll be talking about COVID, the future of work, Amazon's new workforce vision. And then the week after that, we'll talk with one of the Amazon Original Stories editors who worked with Andrew Bearer on Youngblood. If you are on Clubhouse, I hope you'll stop by tomorrow, Saturday, April 17th at 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's when we'll be talking about the Andrew Bearer interview. I told the publicist if he wanted to stop by, we'd love to see him, but I think that's probably unlikely. He's pretty busy. But we've had some great discussions in the past few weeks, and it's a lot of fun. We talk about the interview and anything else that's up. I'd be curious what people think of Jeff Bezos' letter if they've had a chance to read it too. So you'll find a link on how to get to that room in the at Clubhouse in the show notes at thekindlechronicles.com. Thanks for listening.